Well, Media Salles does do several things, but the reason why we are here now is because Media Salles collects figures about the basic indicators of cinema going all over Europe. We are covering 39 countries, and we started collecting figures on cinema going already about 30 years ago, so we have a very long series of historical data starting from 1981. So let's say every year during the Berlin Film Festival we present an overview of cinema going in the year that has just passed. Yeah, we collect the basic indicators for cinema going, such as admissions, gross box office, number of screens, number of cinemas, and then we elaborate these data. For instance, we calculate the frequency per capita or the average expenditure per capita for cinema going. And we collect figures about market shares. So, for instance, to understand which is the role of domestic movies within each of the countries that we survey. And nowadays we survey 39 countries, which means the 28 countries of the European Union plus other territories like Russia or Turkey or Iceland, in order to give, let's say, a full picture of what is happening in the continent in terms of cinema going, in terms of cinemas, and also technology in the cinemas, because one of the other things that we survey is the development of digital technology. And we have done that from the very beginning, since when in Europe there were only 30 digital screens installed in the overall continent. Well, let's say that we can start from good news, because 2019 was a good year for cinema admissions in Europe, and in the 39 countries we have spoken about, admissions grew by 4.1%. The growth was even more in the EU countries, where the increase was about 5.1%. And we can also have a look at the Western European countries, and they grew by 5.3%, whilst the central and eastern part of the continent plus the Mediterranean Rim countries grew by 2.5% last year. But let's say that in general it was a very good year. For instance, we could say that some countries that had suffered from a decrease in 2018 were able to grow and to recoup some of the admissions that they had lost the previous year, or even all of them. And let's say those countries are, for instance, large markets such as Germany or Italy or Spain, that in 2019 had a very significant growth in their spectators. And also it was quite a good year for the Eastern and Central European countries. When I say quite, I mean that there were some countries, like for instance Russia, that grew more than the average for the continent. In fact, Russia last year became the first European market with more than 217 million tickets sold, with an increase of about 8%. So for the second time, this had already happened in 2017, Russia had more spectators than France, which has always been considered the leader market in Europe in terms of cinema admissions. So if we talk about the growth rate in Central and Eastern Europe, for instance, the Czech Republic had a very important increase, more than 12%. And also, it was a very good year for Bosnia and Herzegovina. In this country, the increase was about 11%, but there are other countries that grew much more than the average, and one of them, for instance, is the Slovak Republic, 9.5%, and also another country that grew quite a lot was Croatia, 6.6%. I just remind that the average growth for this part of Europe was 2.5%. So also in Croatia there was a very significant increase. Well, what we could say about Central and Eastern Europe is that quite often we see that the top film in terms of admissions is a domestic movie. And this has happened this year in the Baltic countries, for instance. And so it means that domestic films that are either comedies or films related to specific historical facts of the country have the power of attracting to the cinema also some spectators who would probably not go to the cinema to watch blockbusters. So we can say that domestic movies are able to attract a kind of an additional segment of spectators. And we see that in general, in Eastern and Central part of Europe, there are several countries where the market share of the domestic film is above or around 20%, which is definitely a good performance also compared to the Western European countries. Well, let's say that in Central and Eastern in the part of Europe, there has been a kind of a steady growth for the past 20 years. And we could assume that there could be a further growth as we see that the frequency per capita in general in this part of Europe is less than the frequency per capita in the Western countries. So we believe that there is a potential for further growth. Just to give you an idea, we have seen that Russia this year has sold 217 million tickets, France has sold 213 million tickets, but the average frequency per capita in these two territories is definitely very different. In France, every citizen goes to the cinema more than 3 times per year, whilst a Russian citizen goes to the cinema about 1.5 times per year. So we can imagine that improvement in the infrastructures, improvement in the offer of cinema facilities could result in a further increase of attendance in a large country such as Russia. Well, we are tracking what is happening in this specific field of the cinema offer because we have always been trying to survey what is new in the cinema experience. And this type of event events have been made possible thanks to digitization of the cinemas. So this is something new, and we have seen that it's a phenomenon that is growing. It's not easy to collect figures, so I also take advantage of this interview to, in a certain sense, invite all countries to refine their data collection in terms of cinema admissions, because it's very important to understand how many tickets are generated by films, let's say the regular type of offer in cinema, and how many admissions are generated by cultural events such as operas, ballet, drama, or art films, and so on. Because this is something new, that has been appearing since digitization. And we have collected figures so far that, for instance, show that the average ticket price for events is much higher than the ticket price for cinema, which is good, let's say, for the entire chain, from the production to the exhibition of these products. And this could be also a way to finance cultural events. We know that for many countries invest a lot of money in opera or ballet and so on. So we believe that to show these productions in cinema is very beneficial. It's another source of income, but it's also a way to make the enjoyment of these productions more, we could say, democratic, because many more people could have access to this type of cultural events that in some cases are considered elite event. The cinema makes this event accessible to a larger amount of people.